It will be one of our last of the year. But today we have a very big lineup. We'll have Brian Pearce, our chief economist, who will be speaking about the October traffic results. Then we'll have Hemant Mistry, our director for global airport infrastructure and fuel. He'll be talking about some of the work we're doing around market stimulation. We'll have a few comments from Alexandre Juniac, our Director General, and then we'll throw it open for questions. And as usual, the questions will be via the chat function. So that's quite a lot to get through in an hour. So we'll start promptly with Brian. Over to you.
Thank you, Tony. So we could go to the first slide, please. Thank you. So I guess the first thing to say is that the news on the efficacy of the vaccines has been very encouraging, and I think it does mean that there is light at the end of the tunnel. However, the subject of the presentation today is that we're still in the tunnel, and there is still quite some way to go before we get out of it. And in particular, if we look at what happened in October, there was a further slowdown of the relatively muted travel recovery that we saw in the summer months. You can see here that domestic RPKs, domestic markets are still expanding, but at a slower rate. They're now within about 40% of where they were last year. But very disappointingly, international markets have been flatlining. We've seen no improvement in international markets really for the last 3 months. We're still almost 88% down on last year, and I think there's some way to go before we get a decent recovery in air travel. If we can move to the next slide. I think we should say that the domestic situation is much better than the international passenger business for airlines. One of the key metrics is the passenger load factor, because this is such a capital-intensive industry. You need a high load factor to break even and to start generating cash-positive flying. It looks as if that's happening on domestic markets on average. We've now seen the domestic load factor rise to a bit more than 70%, which will be above the break-even point. And that means that airlines with large domestic markets, in particular those in China, will be doing relatively better. But as you can see, the international situation is rather dire and has been deteriorating. We've got international load factors down at below 43%. They've been deteriorating, so that's a long way from break-even. But if we move to the next slide, even amongst those domestic markets, we're seeing huge contrasts across the world. As I mentioned earlier, China is doing well. The Chinese domestic market, we've seen travel measured by RPKs fully recover. It's down fractionally on last year by just over 1% in October. There's been a bit of a setback in the Russian market, which had fully recovered in the summer. We've seen a renewed surge of coronavirus cases that has knocked that recovery a little. And the biggest market, the US, and also the Australian market, we're seeing pretty disappointing recoveries there. So very mixed, even on the domestic markets, which are doing relatively better. And a lot of that variation can be explained by relative success or not in controlling the coronavirus, ahead of the future distribution of vaccines. And if we look at the next slide, this shows the new cases in COVID-19. We could move to the next slide, please. So we saw that huge surge, that second wave in Europe. The lockdowns in Europe seem to be bringing that under control, but it's still at relatively high levels. The US is also peaking, but as this is starting to come under control, we're seeing rises in cases in the rest of the world, with the very notable exception of China, of course, which is still at exceptionally low cases. And this has been the main issue, I think, behind the poor recovery, the very limited recovery in air travel. The virus has been very difficult to get under control ahead of the vaccines coming in. We can move to the next slide. And the result of this has been that travel restrictions still remain very high. Look at the level of these travel restrictions compared to where we were at the beginning of the crisis. They have come down in the last 2 to 3 months, particularly with the introduction of testing regimes in Central America and also in Africa and the Middle East. But even so, there are still lots of restrictions that are limiting the ability of people to travel internationally. And if we look at the next slide, we can see the result, and that is that most international markets remain exceptionally weak. Those coloured grey, these are the major route areas, have seen very little recovery. We had seen travel within Europe internationally show very encouraging recovery because of the bubble that was put in place for quarantine-free travel. But of course, since the second wave has hit, we've seen travel restrictions and quarantine put in place, and a sharp deterioration in travel since then. The one market where we are seeing some growth is between North and Central America. Unfortunately, that's a relatively small market. It's 1/10 of the size of the within Europe market. So it's not making a difference overall to the industry, but it's instructive in that it's being generated by Central American countries putting in place not quarantine restrictions, but testing regimes, the requirement for a negative COVID test. And that is generating travel as can be seen. And if we look at the next slide, this also shows what can happen to travel, and these show bookings if governments relax quarantine requirements. We know we've been presenting lots of evidence that shows that a 14-day quarantine is equivalent to a full travel ban. If we look here at the market between the UK and the US, before and after the announcement of their test to release policy, which was enacted on the 23rd of November, where the quarantine period was reduced substantially, and a negative COVID test was required for release from that. But that has encouraged what you can see here has been a doubling of the bookings out to the end of November. So there is a willingness to travel. It's largely because of the restrictions that we're not seeing that taking place. The vaccine, I said at the beginning, very good news, and it's light at the end of the tunnel. But I think we can see here from these measures of interest in, these are searches of major flight sites, Google Flights, Kayak, Skyscanner. And as you can see, the announcement that we are going to be having vaccines available has generated some increase in interest in flying, but not by very much. And certainly, we're a very long way away from where we were before the crisis, and it's certainly not comparable at all to the improvements that we saw in the summer months when we saw the start of the recovery. And if I move to the next and final slide, really just to make the point that if we look at the bookings curve for travel within Europe, for the period over the Christmas holidays, so December the 15th to January the 10th. So these are bookings for that period. We're 4 weeks away from that typically peak travel period, which is so important for the cash flow of airlines, obviously in Europe. We would normally see 63% of tickets for flying in that period already sold by today. We're 80% down, even though we have seen, as you can see from the blue line, an improvement in bookings. We're 80% down. We're still a very long way from the end of that tunnel. And I think this does point to, before we get a significant improvement in air travel, which we are expecting from the arrival of the vaccines and the vaccination, but we doubt that that's going to really take effect in a substantial way until the second half of next year. Meanwhile, it's going to be a pretty tough winter for airlines with bookings at these sorts of levels. Revenues are still going to be very scarce to achieve, and we're going to need help in stimulating markets and indeed in supporting airlines over that period. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Brian. So now we'll switch to Hemant Mistry, who will take us through a little bit of discussion on market stimulation. So Hemant, over to you.
Thank you, Tony, and thanks to Brian as well for the presentation. So if we move to the first slide, please. Just to recap on some of the current risks we have a situation right now where governments have provided, by and large, around 173 billion in terms of financial assistance. Now, that can be in terms of loans, loan guarantees, in terms of equity, direct cash injections, tax reduction, wage subsidies as well. But more is going to be needed as we go forward, as Brian explained as well. The situation is still difficult. And more so if things are not done differently as airlines struggle with what we see in Brian's slide, which is stalled traffic and stagnant bookings, really. So airlines are not expected to be cash positive, as you recall, until the fourth quarter of 2021. And moreover, the improvements we're seeing, the good improvements we're seeing in terms of testing and in terms of vaccine maturity, they're taken into account in terms of our forecasts. So there is a risk of widespread bankruptcies in the airline industry. And of course, that could also mean more cost to governments in terms of future bailouts, or equally important, if not more, in terms of the actual economic impact in that aviation is not able to support the much due economic recovery itself to its fullest extent. So we're really looking for governments to take some urgent action in terms of supporting the financial aid they're providing and supplementing that with market stimulation benefits. And on the right-hand side here, you can see some of the benefits we would see from that. If governments were to implement the market stimulation initiatives, which I'll explain to you during this presentation, we foresee that there'd be a faster recovery of the industry. There'd be an opportunity to avoid distortion of competition by making those initiatives available for a given jurisdiction itself across the airlines. And of course, because we're stimulating traffic through these initiatives, we should also be in a situation whereby the benefits are provided across the value chain. So not just for airlines, but across the value chain, including the infrastructure providers and the suppliers as well. These benefits provide direct benefits to passengers because they will stimulate demand and affordability for passengers. And I think this last point is very important in that the initiatives we're looking at should be easy for governments to implement, but also easy for governments to exit when they see the conditions improve as well. So let's move to the next slide, please. Now, this is a bit of a busy slide, but simply to say that on the left-hand side, you can see the different benefits we would see for airlines from these initiatives. And on the right-hand side, you can see the different benefits for governments. And we're really seeing win-win situations. And there are basically 5 categories of stimulus options we foresee. The first one is not too much of a surprise to you, which is really a reduction in terms of those input costs, both to airlines and to passengers. Can governments waive or suspend some of these charges and fees And of course, it's easier where the government is itself owning the service provision, and of course, the government is in charge of setting the taxation levels, etc. They can take those direct actions. The second initiative is in terms of route subsidies, where governments can provide financial support for airlines to operate routes, and this is really to connect rural communities, businesses. But I think really importantly, we have seen examples where governments have used this type of initiative successfully to maintain connections in terms of tourism routes as well. The third category is in terms of incentives for flights and for seats. Now, this is something very interesting we've been seeing which governments can actually support further, in that providing rewards for airlines to operate flights, to build up those frequencies again, even though load factors and yields will be low during next year as well. So this is something which can be done on a per seat basis, or it can be done in terms of also cargo traffic as well. And I'll explain a bit more about that. Number 4, in terms of the categories of initiatives, is about government's advanced purchasing tickets. It supports liquidity across the airlines, especially when the borders are closed or restrictive. But also, it provides the opportunity for the governments to distribute those tickets, for example, to the travelling public. It could be a windfall when borders open up. So there's a great opportunity there as well. And the final category is on travel subsidies. So we've seen a number of governments take the initiative to provide packages supporting fares, accommodation, and general tours as well. What I'd like to do is to provide a quick summary in terms of some case studies we've seen each of these, because we want to explain to you how there have been successes. But the overall message is that we need to see more governments taking up these initiatives. The first one is on those taxes, charges, and fees. So we see the case here for the US CARES Act. As many of you will know, that was first implemented in March this year, and it allowed for the suspension of various taxes, including the domestic ticket tax, the flight segment tax, also the international arrivals and departure taxes as well. Now, overall, on average, that allowed for a reduction in terms of $18 per passenger in terms of travel as well. And of course, that's been quite important in terms of that development of domestic traffic during the pandemic as well. But there's many other cases around the world, and I'm very happy to provide you with a full listing of waivers and suspensions where governments have taken action, but again, more needs to be done. Some good examples on airport charges and some on ATC charges. We've seen some governments take initiatives on waiving visa fees. We need to see much more in terms of action for waiving COVID fees as well. If we move to the next slide, this is now looking at the actual subsidies for routes. How do you maintain those connections on a regional and a local basis? That's the primary objective. We've seen these types of route subsidies being implemented in Scandinavia and Australasia to connect those rural and regional communities and businesses. The case example I want to show here for you is on Cyprus, because I've taken the initiative in a similar way to connect those tourist routes. And here you see an example where they provided some form of compensation based on load factor, varying between 7 and 17 euros per passenger on a sliding scale. On the right-hand side, you can see what's happened to traffic. The scheme was implemented in July, and you can see that the connections before were to 22 states. As a result of this, and of course there's other factors that lead to the actual traffic development as well, but on average has been around 40 connections as a result of the contribution of this initiative. If we move to the next slide, we'll talk more about the general initiatives we've seen where governments have provided some form of compensation or reward to airlines in terms of operating flights to provide more stimulus to operate, to regain those frequencies. And here you see an example in terms of the Greek government, where they, in April and May, provided a compensation initiative of 20 euros per seat. And again, if we look at the right-hand side, you can see how that has materialized in terms of or supported the actual traffic development. And here we're looking at not connections, but actual passenger numbers. And when you compare that to other similar markets in Portugal, Italy, and Spain, you can see how the passenger market developed in Greece. What is important is that while that scheme was withdrawn at the end of May, the development in the passenger numbers still remained the same as well. And that's a really positive message in terms of the implementation as these schemes in terms of a stimulus package. They're doing their job in that sense. Let's move to the next slide. And we can see here what I talked about in terms of the initiatives where some governments have taken in terms of pre-purchasing tickets. So it supports liquidity, of course, within the airlines when borders are closed or restricted, as I mentioned. In the case of Hong Kong, the government purchased 500,000 tickets, and they'll be distributed by the airport authority, which is government-owned. And they'll do that in the form of a lucky draw. So when they feel confident enough that borders have opened up sufficiently, they are going to distribute these tickets to the travelling public, a mixture between local residents and overseas visitors as well. And to avoid competition, what they've done is they've allocated those tickets across the 4 home-based carriers in a percentage share of the 2019 traffic. So this is a good initiative which we would really like to see more governments take up as well. And then finally, on the next slide, we can see this is the broader travel subsidy packages which we've seen some governments start to implement. Because this has a benefit in terms of reducing fares, of course, but as well as the overall travel and accommodation costs, and provides a stimulus on the broader sense in terms of tourism itself. The case example we have here is for Thailand, where the government released 3 stimulus packages. One is the Happy Sharing Trips, which is subsidizing fares, the airfare and associated fares. There's also a very, very good one in terms of moral support, which is providing a fund for healthcare workers. So a great initiative there and allowing them to travel as well. And then there is the Travelling Together fund, which is basically supporting the costs associated with accommodation and also meals as well. So those 3 packages were released for July, and you can see on the right-hand side how traffic has developed. This is domestic traffic after that time as well. So once again, these are contributing factors to the traffic development, but the case examples I've shown provide a positive example of how these stimulus packages can be used. If we move to the final slide, again, just to summarize, what we're looking for is governments to really take a close look at some of these stimulus initiatives and see what can be done in their market to support the financial assistance which they will still need to provide to the airlines, but what can be done to really stimulate demand and to stimulate supply. And I've recategorized those different initiatives according to those 2 areas themselves here. So cutting charges, taxes and fees, reducing those input costs is stimulating demand, purchasing tickets, launching travel subsidy programs. They're all stimulating the demand for air travel. And then subsidizing those routes, providing airlines with rewards to operate flights with low load factors and low yields is stimulating the actual supply itself. And the more governments can help the industry on that, the more we can be in a situation where the industry is able to recover better, quicker, and the benefits will be passed on across the industry and, in fact, also across the tourism sector itself. So with that, Tony, I'll hand back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Hemant. We're running a little short on time in the sense that we're at 25 past the hour now. So I think we'll go directly to questions, if that's all right with you, Alexandre.
Absolutely.
Great. We've got quite a number of questions in the queue already. So we'll start with the first one, which is asking about the IATA Travel Pass initiative. And I guess the first is just to clarify, the Travel Pass at this point in time is to facilitate testing and the certification of testing results. But the questioner asks, given all the discussion on vaccines, will the Travel Pass also hold vaccine data? Alexandre, did you want to take that one?
So the IATA Travel Pass is, as you know, is an app that will manage the flow of information that exists between the passenger, the various lab and testing facilities, airlines and government. And of course, it will include all the information coming from the testing facilities, the fact that you have been tested, the result of the test, the day you have been tested, the validity, etc. Plus, obviously, when the vaccine will be available, the fact that you have been or not vaccinated. So it's a comprehensive app that is there to manage the flow of information, to certify that everything has been properly done according to government requirements, and using a list of lab and test facilities that has been recommended, approved, recognized by health authorities.
Great, thank you very much, Alexandre. And just one more precision on that. There have been, over the past week or so, a lot of stories speculating that IATA was somehow imposing a vaccination requirement on passengers. I think we'd also take the opportunity to confirm that it will be governments that make those decisions, not airlines specifically. So we've got a few other questions in the queue. This one for you, Brian. It says, the questioner asks, is what we're seeing in China in terms of the recovery timeline a good guiding scenario for how we would expect recoveries in other parts of the world to take place, assuming the virus dissipates at the same rate?
Yes, I think it is. We've now seen a full recovery of the market in less than a year, and that's roughly equivalent to what we've seen in previous pandemics and previous shocks, where it's taken sort of 6 to 9 months to get back to pre-crisis levels. So I think it does show the willingness to fly, if possible. So as we see the ability of people to get back to flying, I think we will see that sort of scale of recovery. And I think that the evidence is that that's already there. We saw that in the case where the UK removed the quarantine requirement for the Spanish Canary Islands. We've seen the scale of the bookings increases with the reduction in the quarantine requirements and the testing in the UK. In Latin America, with the introduction of testing regimes, we've seen some very significant improvements in both bookings and travel. So yes, I think the evidence is building that we will see a sort of similar shaped recovery to what we've seen in the Chinese domestic market once travel restrictions allow.
Okay, thanks very much, Brian. We have another question which talks about face masks. And maybe this one is for you, Alexandre. The questioner asks, as people become vaccinated, will the requirement to wear a face mask on board aircraft disappear?
All the measures that have been taken within the ICAO framework, what we have called the takeoff guidelines or the CART 1 recommendation, the testing recommendations that have been also implemented or recommended and hopefully implemented in the CART 2 process, also within the ICAO framework, they have all been taken with one key principle, at least one key principle as to base this recommendation was that everything should be temporary and should be removed when the necessity will disappear. So when the COVID-19 pandemic will be solved or considered as something that is definitely under control. So the obligation to wear a mask among them is the one that should be removed when it will not be necessary, and will be maintained as long as the health authority consider that it is that the pandemic is not over, and that we need to maintain the protective measures that have been put in place.
Okay, thanks very much, Alexandre. We have another question, which is talking about the financial support from governments. So maybe this one is for you, Hemant, or for Brian. It asks, do you think financial support from governments for the airline sector will be as high in 21 as it was in 20?
Brian? Yeah. Let me kick off on that one. I think not, for the simple reason that 2020 has been the core of the crisis. We saw airlines burning through cash, losing money at a rate of more than $50 billion in just one quarter, in the second quarter. They're starting to reduce that, and as markets start to pick up, we expect a further reduction. But even in the first half of next year, we're expecting airlines to be burning through more than $40 billion of cash just in the first half of next year, before a better second half. So although the scale of the support is not going to be the same, it will still need to be there, and it's of a different nature. This is what we need is support for the recovery, support for the restart, rather than keeping the industry alive when it was grounded.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Maybe there's another question also on market stimulation measures. So maybe this one for you, Hemant. It says, how have governments received these proposals when you've been discussing with them? Have they been enthusiastic, willing to implement, or a bit reticent?
I think in general that they've been positive about this initiative, mainly because of some of the positives which I described at the beginning of the presentation. There's benefits for the airlines, for the governments, and for the travelling public as well. And when we try and explain that this could lead to an earlier recovery of the industry, I think that's something which rings a bell with all stakeholders in that sense. But also I should point out that some of these measures have actually been developed by governments themselves as well. They've taken the initiative because they see the benefits directly.
Okay. So maybe just a follow-up on that, Hemant. How optimistic are you that you're going to see more governments taking these measures?
I'm hopeful. I'm quite optimistic. Let me just answer the question directly. I'm quite optimistic that they will see the benefit of rolling out these measures on a broader scale, particularly as borders are relaxed with the developments in testing and the vaccines as well. The combination of those two things is really what we need for the timing itself.
Okay, thanks. Next question maybe to you, Alexandre. The questioner says, or references the IATA ECDC report from last week. In that report, one of the key findings was that in current circumstances, quarantine is not a very effective measure for the European situation. And the questioner asked, what conversations have you had with governments in the aftermath of that report? Have they been sympathetic towards abolishing quarantine measures?
Not yet, to be simple. Unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. So I suppose the follow-up on that would be, with respect to IATA's call for testing to replace quarantine measures, has there been any movement by governments in that direction?
But it takes time because our call for systematic testing using new technologies such as antigen testing is based on the very recent improvement in the technology particularly of the test. So it's not surprising that government and health authority remain cautious and are slow moving. But we are pushing hard for them, to implement this type of testing. So we see some governments moving. The French government is moving. The German government is is also thinking of moving in that direction. We see some Asian governments moving in that direction, Singapore, for instance. So progressively, and some country in the Middle East. So progressively, it is coming into force, but the way is still pretty long.
Okay, thank you, Alexandre. We have a question about cargo traffic, and the questioner references yesterday's announcement of October cargo results, and says, with the capacity crunch continuing and higher yields, are you expecting airlines to move or to expand their cargo activities, and can you see them converting some of their passenger capacity or passenger activities to cargo?
Yeah, there's an intense focus on cargo at the moment because revenues are stronger than they were last year. Cargo is proving to be the part of the airline business that can carry on during the COVID crisis. It's not a vector for disease. Indeed, it's a key support both for global supply chains and for getting pharmaceuticals and medicines around. We are seeing cargo, as well as supporting the world economy and the distribution of medicines, also allowing many of the longer haul routes to be cash positive. Cargo, with the better yields that airlines are receiving at the moment because of the capacity shortage, cargo revenues are replacing the higher yield business passengers that are absent at the moment. So it's actually playing an important role in maintaining and re-establishing connectivity between countries and cities, as well as providing some support for airlines. But in the bigger picture, it's by no means sufficient to offset what has been a catastrophic collapse in passenger revenues. We need those to recover for the industry as a whole to be healthier and to re-establish connectivity, and that requires a sort of stimulus measures that Hemant and Alexandre were talking about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Brian. We have a question on vaccine transport. So maybe this one is for you, Alexandre. It's asking essentially, how are the airline preparations for distributing the vaccine progressing? And do you see any roadblocks that need to be removed in order for that to be successful?
Well, the airlines have prepared. We have prepared ourselves now for months, and we have discussed with all our partners in the COVAX alliance, which regroups the main partners involved in the vaccine distribution. So we are ready, and even if it is a very, very big logistical operation, we should be able to distribute the vaccine on a very large scale in a limited time frame. So we are not very worried. We have issued some guidelines and recommendations for everyone to prepare all the and addressing all the elements of the logistical chain. So things are being worked out and should be ready. The main roadblock we could identify perhaps are the following. First of all is the need for cargo capacity to be available. As you know, cargo capacity have shrunk due to the reduction in passenger traffic because we are using a lot the bellies of the passenger aircraft to transport cargo, and as the international traffic has dropped by 90%, the number of aircraft that are flying now has been reduced significantly. So the capacity in cargo is also limited. So that is something on which we are working, but that could be it could be not a roadblock, but probably something we have to clearly identify. And the second point is to be sure that every part of the world, every country, is properly served, and that there is no country or regions ignored in that distribution scheme.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandre. In the same line, Alexandre, you mentioned that capacity could be a challenge. We have a few questions about just how big a challenge that could be. And maybe, I don't know, Brian, do you have any analysis on the capacity available to carry vaccines and how severe that capacity crunch might be?
Well, let me just quickly comment on the current situation. I think it exaggerates the problem that will face us when we need to distribute the vaccine, I guess, in the early part of next year, because in bulk, because at the moment this is peak season for the cargo business. We've got whereas we have air travel down more than 70%, we see cargo volumes down just 6%, 6.2%. Such is the strength of demand at the moment. But capacity, because the passenger fleet has still not returned in sufficient numbers, capacity is still down over 22% from where we were last year. But as we move into the first part of next year, that is the low season for the cargo business. That will free up a lot of capacity. And indeed, there are a lot of aircraft at the moment that can be deployed from the passenger fleet to do the airlift for the vaccine, as Alexandre has already intimated.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian. We have another question on testing and the IATA ECDC guidelines that were recently published. The questioner says that the guidelines seem to suggest that testing for passengers is not recommended, and rather because they fear that that could draw resources away from things like contact tracing. How does IATA view that part of the report?
I'm sorry, but I don't understand the point.
So the report says it doesn't seem to favor testing, and rather says that resources should be put into things like contact tracing. Do you agree, or how would you counter that argument?
It's completely different. It's two different system of. It's not the same resources, not the same personnel, not the same technology. What are we talking? I'm sorry, but I don't understand what are we talking about. I'm sorry, but.
Yeah. Okay. So So then I think the answer would be that if we're going to tackle this problem, we see testing as being a very critical part of it, and governments will need to find the resources to do both testing and contact tracing as part of the solution. Would you agree with that, Alexandre?
Sorry, but the contact tracing, if it's not working, it's because people are refusing to use contact tracing and to download the apps. So I don't see why there is a problem of resource allocation. Perhaps there is, but I don't understand. I'm sorry, but.
Right. Okay. So if there's a problem with contact tracing, it's not a problem of resources being taken by.
I think it's a resource allocation question.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. We have another question referring back to government support. And it says that most of the support by governments has been helpful, but it's also generated debt within the industry. And what will the impact of that debt be eventually on consumers, and will we see that in higher ticket prices eventually?
Well, it's certainly going to be a considerable burden on airlines as operations restart. Not only has more than half of government aid been in the form of debt that needs to be repaid, but also in order to generate the cash to survive, airlines have been issuing debt and equity on the capital markets. So debt has risen by, we reckon, more than $220 billion this year. That's a more than 50% rise in airlines' debt. And obviously the earnings to support that, to pay the debt interest that needs to be paid regularly, and also to repay the debt once it comes to maturity, those are fixed obligations. And with limited cash flows to do that, indeed, airlines are burning through cash. This is a real problem, and it could certainly trigger airline failures in the next 6 months if we don't see governments stimulating markets or putting in place testing regimes and other measures to get travel revenues, passenger revenues back. I think that's a real issue. I don't think it's going to affect the price passengers will pay. That really depends on the competition that there is, and we know that is still pretty intense and going to be pretty intense. It's interesting to note that we've seen relatively few airlines fail because of the support from governments. We've seen about 40 or 50 airlines fail or move into the protection of bankruptcy to restructure. But we've seen quite a number of new entrant airlines because of the availability of aircraft and crew. So, the industry still is and will be very competitive. So I think that the debt burden is more a danger to airlines and their investors than it is to consumers today.
Tony, if I could just add to that as well. So one of the bits I probably didn't emphasize during my presentation is the market stimulation initiatives we mentioned. They, of course, have the additional benefit of not adding to that debt burden any further. So that there's the opportunity for governments to help out without increasing that debt burden to airlines as well.
Great. Thank you, Hemant. We have another question maybe for you, Brian. With what seems to be a disappointing year-end season, does that change or alter IATA's prognosis for an industry recovery, or was that sort of calculated in previously?
I think that market developments and the relatively weak levels of bookings that we're seeing, I mean, they're going up, but they're 80% down on where they were last year for the December-January holiday period in Europe. I mean, that is what we were expecting would take place when we issued our forecast at the AGM. So we were expecting to see, a relatively slow, continued gain in domestic markets, but very limited gain on international markets until we start to get through to the sort of the second and third quarter of 2021, where we would hope that governments would follow the example of some of the Latin American countries, or what we've started to see in the UK with testing regimes being put in place to help stimulate demand, and the measures that Hemant put in place suggested would also help to stimulate markets ahead of the more widespread distribution and use of vaccines later next year. So no change to our forecast. We think it's still a slow recovery for the next 6 months, which is why it's such a challenging environment for the airline industry.
Okay, thank you, Brian. We have a question on the IATA travel pass. So maybe this one is for Alexandre. And the question is, has the timeline for that coming to market shifted at all? And how soon can we expect consumers to be able to use that app?
To my knowledge, the timing has not shifted. We are in the testing phase now for approximately 2 months, and the app should be available by the end of the first quarter on a large scale.
Okay. And I suppose a follow-up to that would be, are there some governments that have shown any interest in the app?
Many governments have shown interest in the app. The app will not work well if there is no recognition or agreement from government, and particularly border control and health authority. But we are working with these administrations regularly, especially border control, through our thematic application, which is an application for a product that is available now for decades and used by border control administration, travel agents, airlines, etc. So we do not expect too much resistance from governments. On the contrary.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandre. We have a few questions on Brexit. And the question first off says, if there is no agreement, what alternative arrangements need to be put in place before January 1st? And if that were to happen, what is the bare minimum and what else would you like to see? So maybe Alexandre, did you want to take that?
Yes, I can. But so there is a transitory phase that will be in place if there is no agreement, and in the long term, the air service agreement will have to be renegotiated between the UK and the country in Europe, the countries in Europe.
Okay, so I suppose from that, you're confident that irrespective of what happens, passengers that need to travel between the UK and Europe will be able to travel?
Immediately after a no deal Brexit, the answer is yes. On mid-run, I hope that governments will be able to conclude agreements with air service agreements between them. So it should work, hopefully. Okay,
thank you. We have another question which follows up on that, and it's for Brian. It suggests that if, as a no deal Brexit scenario becomes even more realistic, how will that impact, or could that impact the outlook for the industry, particularly in Europe, given the ongoing and deepening COVID crisis?
Yeah, I mean, it's we've seen lots of analysis over the past, since 2016 on the impact of a no deal Brexit, because it puts up trade barriers, and so it is negative for trade between the UK and Europe. That obviously has an impact on the aviation industry through air cargo. That's particularly important for a number of UK airports and UK services. So until we see a new trade deal negotiated and put in place, it's going to mean that certainly the volume of air cargo carried by airlines will be down fairly significantly, and that will be clearly that has been an area of strength for the industry, and it will hamper the recovery.
Great, thank you, Brian. We have one last question, and that concerns vaccination. At the AGM, the airlines passed a resolution which called for a certain prioritization of people working in the industry to receive vaccinations. So, Alexandre, I guess the question is for you. How important is that, and how optimistic are you that there will be a prioritization for air transport workers?
Sorry, the question is for me because there was an interruption in the communication.
Oh, okay, yes. The question is for you. So it's about vaccination. And at the AGM, there was the resolution which called on a certain prioritization for air transport workers. How important is that, and how optimistic are you that governments will see the need to prioritize air transport.
We are calling governments to for considering that air transport workers, not only the airline workers, but the airport, the ground handling, and some of our industry partners that are working day to day with us could be considered as priority workers. Well, we of course do not claim for being number one priority ahead of other part of the population, the healthcare workers, or the most vulnerable that are, of course, more vulnerable than our people. But we consider that our people should be considered also as a priority and should come very, very soon after the most exposed and vulnerable part of the population. So we are going to ask government for being considered as a priority.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexandre. That pretty much brings us to the top of the hour.